Hello, peoples of the internet, and welcome to another Stairway Mountain time trial. Today, we have the theme of V8s. Basically, it's cars with V8 engines, although rest assured, they're not all muscle cars. Here, we have the Ford Crown Victoria though, which is arguably a muscle car. However, if you do classify it as a muscle car, it's a very strange one. It makes 200 horsepower, supposedly. That may be underrated or even overrated a bit, just to make it look different on the insurance and stuff. Because 200 horsepower is a very strange number. Also, it revs really low, 4,250 RPM, which is strange. Normally a V8 can happily rev to about 6,000 RPM. Anyway, the weight is 1777 kilograms, which is a bit lighter than the Burnside, and it's a car that wants you to drive it gently. It's a strange one, this, because if you do drive it gently, you can set an 8:55 time quite happily. But as you might see from my driving, I'm not driving it gently, and the reason for that is, nice as it might be round the corners with the gentle driving, it is not fast that way. Anyway, it's still a nice vehicle to drive. It just struggles really when you try and floor it out of every corner as I do, and it doesn't carve corners like the CRX. Speaking of which, it sits directly above the stock CRX on my leaderboard, which is interesting because I felt it might be somewhere around there. This does have a bit more speed than the CRX, but you have to really work the speed out. You have to know what you're doing to get it out. However, when you do try and work the speed out, it's not the worst vehicle should you make a small mistake. For example, I had a pretty intense knock on the front of this vehicle and the steering was bent, but it still drove somewhat reasonably well. I think the smallish wheels help with that because the tyre takes a lot of the impact. The tyre sidewall and stuff takes a whole lot of the impact and makes it really quite smooth and stuff. You can even go over bumps at massively high speeds and nothing will go majorly wrong. So, it's a vehicle I would definitely recommend. When I got it to the end, it survived quite nicely. As I said, I bent the front wheel up, but it still drove, so it was not really a point I was worried about. It came above the CRX, as I've said, and came just below the 90s Pessima base model, which is interesting because looking back on it, that 90s Pessima base model, despite being a base model that felt really underpowered, is beating a fair number of respectable vehicles. So that's not bad of it. Anyway, the car was good. On to the next vehicle. Next up we have a Gavril Vanster Off-Road. This is in many ways like the Super Sport van I took down the hill a while ago, only it's got four-wheel drive and beefier tyres. The suspension may also be a bit taller, but there was nothing that I really noticed there, because the Super Sport van did look pretty high off the ground, even though it is supposed to be a sporty van that may sit lower. I don't know. Anyway, it's got the exact same supercharged V8 as the Gavril Super Sport van, which gives it some decent go, although the automatic transmission is a bit miserable. It feels like it's searching for gears constantly. When you try and power out a corner, it just feels like there's nothing there, almost like turbo lag. And it's okay round the corners. It's got grip, but the lack of ABS does get annoying quite a lot of the time. But if it didn't have ABS, it would be worse. It would just have no braking power. Now, braking into a corner, because there's no anti-lock brakes, you can lock up the brakes quite easily when you hammer down the brakes, which you actually have to do because it's not got really powerful brakes for the weight of the vehicle. And then that can throw you out of shape a bit into a corner, meaning you pretty much have to just understeer out for a bit and then floor it and hope the rear end cooperates. As you'll see here, I'm going full speed out the corner, and if you get it wrong, it can and will roll onto the side. There you go, you might have seen it just tipped a bit. That was it wanting to tip over. Now if I go over some bumps, that makes it much more likely to tip over, hence why I try to avoid the bumps as much as possible here, because previous laps I just tried to carry too much speed over bumps. You can actually use quite a lot of cornering angle, as long as you don't go over the bumps, you can use quite a lot of cornering angle to pull it round the corners, which I found quite interesting, because other vehicles such as the Gavril Roma Custom, you floor that with too much turning angle and that will tip over. That was quicker than this though. This vehicle set a reasonable time. It's 8 minutes 6.74, which is just a few seconds off the Super Sport van. As I said, I believe that's the understeer causing that. It's just not quite as nice round the corner, it doesn't feel quite as agile round the corners. And overall it's not a vehicle I can recommend, because the Super Sport van just feels that much nicer to drive. However, when I did get to the end, other than a bit of radiator damage which happened on one of the jumps on the road, I didn't actually smash it up, it was just the road, it couldn't stand the bumps on it. And other than that, and a bit of minor knocks and bumps at the front, it survived perfectly, because you try and carry speed over bumps on this and it really just tips over and punishes you, and that's not good. But yeah, on to the next vehicle. Next up we have perhaps one of the more common uses of a V8. This is a Ford F-150 from the 1980s. I believe 1980 to 1982, because they dropped the Ranger tag after that, which has been used with this truck. This particular truck has the V8 towing package on it, which actually comes with a trailer, but I removed the tow hitch so I wouldn't have to drag the trailer around, because I wanted the turbo and that's the only way to get it really. Spawn one with a trailer and then get rid of a trailer. Anyway, it's okay to drive really. It will slide when you get off the power though, which is a bit annoying. But on power it grips reasonably well. Overall though, it is a bit slidey despite being four-wheel drive, and there is definitely some turbo lag, as naturally it's an 80s turbo. But that doesn't matter, because this is a truck from the 80s, where turbos were cool, and anything that had a turbo was a really cool car, or truck in this case. And that's probably why they've put it on, to be honest, even though you don't really need a turbo version. It should be supercharged because it would be better for response. But hey, if you're towing, then the turbo's torque is always useful, I guess. And I'm pretty sure a few people tow with their trucks in America. It's an odd vehicle though, in that I believe it's going to be a single turbo V8. Again, this is from the 80s, they just had to make do with what they could. Find a cheap turbo and stick it on your V8 to make it cooler. And that was the way it was. It does feel like it's got some decent grunt when the turbo kicks in. There's not too much without it, but it feels like it's making about 300 horsepower easily, and it pulls it along quite nicely. The handling, as I said, it does slide when you get off the power. It it's not so bad when you're on the power. The key to this vehicle is really just being gentle, and you need to know how to use the turbo lag to your advantage, I guess, out of corners, and not let it throw you off the road or something by kicking in at the wrong moment. So yeah, a vehicle that's okay to drive if you know how to drive it. As far as the time was concerned, it came in a very pick-uppy part of the leaderboard. It came just ahead the D35 7.3 litre turbo diesel, which is the dually truck, and below the Barstow inline 6. It's actually at the top of the SUV truck kind of group. There's two other D series I've got as well, and a turbo diesel Roma, and I believe the base model Roma it beat. However, the Roma Custom did really well. That's under the 7 minutes club, I think. No, under 8 minutes club even. There's not an under 7 minutes club yet. We'll probably need a Formula 1 car or something to do that. So yeah, it's a good vehicle to drive. When I got it to the end, there was actually surprisingly little damage, because other than the odd slidey moment where I got the turbo lag messing me up a bit and knocked a bump or two, it didn't really get damaged, and I think it's the four-wheel drive we can thank for that. The D series, which by the way this is heavily based on, did a big roll when I tried to take that round quickly, given that was rear-wheel drive with no tyre stagger or anything. The turbo diesel was better with the wider rear tyres. But I believe I said what I need to, so on to the next vehicle. The next vehicle we have is the ETK V8 twin turbo. Now this is not an ETK wide body, it's a high power V8 twin turbo ETK with slightly different wheels, and that's about it. I'm guessing it's making upwards of 800 horsepower, but I'm not sure. This particular car is the Estate, although I would like to take the saloon down someday. Unfortunately, I can't use this engine in the saloon. I would have liked to, since it would be less weight and I might be able to shed the odd second off the time, but that's just the way it is. It's a car mod as opposed to an engine mod, you see. Speaking of the driving, it's, as you might expect from a really high power ETK, it feels like it's got a bit too much power, but the four-wheel drive system definitely helps it put it down. And as far as ultra high power cars go, these ETKs always impress me because they're not undrivable, they're actually quite drivable. They struggle, but no more than the 400 horsepower Pessima GTZ does. Well, the GTZ Custom, I've not driven the standard GTZ yet, not down here at least. Anyway, it's like the wide body to drive, only you're less likely to destroy it. Also, I've had to disable ESC, but it does feel somewhat like it's got ESC still on and working, which is strange. It's not completely destroyed if you knock it on a wall, which is nice. And overall, it was a pretty tidy vehicle to drive. I just have to be careful because it requires great responsibility to put this power down, and that's something I do not have, so I frequently messed up until I finally got a good one with it. And it was quick, just not as quick as the wide body. It set a time between the CRX race and the Gavril Super Sport van, and you can feel it's a reasonably serious piece of machinery, but it just doesn't feel as nice as the Gavril Super Sport van to drive. That was a whole lot more fun despite being a van, and the CRX just felt more focused, so it's hard to see where it fits. I guess it's got an advantage over the CRX in terms of not smacking the bumpers onto the ground, and yeah, it feels better engineered, I guess you could say, in that respect. But truth be told, I would just rather go for a CRX because it's generally nicer to drive. In terms of getting it to the end, there was some broken bodywork and glass, and it set on fire, as you're seeing now. I mean, it's poor engineering there if the car just sets on fire when it takes a bit of an impact, to be honest. But what can I say? It's overall survived pretty well, but it's just set on fire. So now, what are you going to do? I believe I could actually drive it while it was on fire, which was a bit strange, but there's not much more I can say. So, on to the next vehicle. Next up, we have perhaps one of the most high-performance V8 vehicles in the game. This is the Civetta Bolide, as you may notice from the interior. In this case, so it's the 390 GTR Scuderia, which has a 3.9 litre V8, making 464 horsepower, I believe naturally aspirated horsepower. So that's a pretty good engine we've got in here. And also it only weighs 1310 kilograms, which is always nice. Now, the thing I'm not quite sure about is it apparently takes 4.2 seconds to get to 60, but it seems slower than that getting off the line, you know. Well, that's what it looked like. Maybe it's just geared that way and it did go that fast. Anyway, speaking of the cornering performance, this is clearly a hardcore road car. You try and accelerate too hard and it will bite. And you go over bumps, you'll feel it is very, very stiff. But that's okay because it's a track special. And that's what we expect a track special to do. So, yeah. I mean, the more power you throw through these, the slidier you get. I believe it's got wider tyres than the base model, but it's still very slidey naturally. It is stiff though, which is always nice. It copes with bumps and stuff just because the shell is so stiff it's not going to bend out of shape as a result of it. And that's all I've really got to say. It's very stable at high speeds, it's okay around the corners, and ultimately a pretty good track record. When I got to the end, it wasn't too smashed up actually. The end jump did most of the damage because naturally if you do smash this up it won't drive so well. It's a powerful vehicle and it can be messed up, although it copes with a lot just because, as I said, it's a stiff body shell, which is always nice. And yeah, it's at a very quick time as well. It's our new 4th position on the leaderboard, just below the 80s Pessima Custom and above the V8 Grand Marshal slightly, which is interesting. As a matter of fact, I believe it's our quickest V8, provided the ETK rocket used a V10, I believe. So, there we go, our new fastest V8 vehicle. I've been waiting to try this for a while because I knew it would be quick. So, with all being said and done, on to the next vehicle. Now, you know I said that pickup trucks were one of the main uses for V8s. Well, yeah, here we have a slightly odd vehicle. It's a Pigeon, only not the Pigeon as you might know it. It's the Pigeon 4-wheel drive. It's actually a very old mod, hence why I've got this silvery paint colour and I can't change it. I believe I used to be able to change it when I had a laptop with rubbish integrated graphics, but now we live in the future, I can't, so I'm kind of stuck with a chrome Pigeon. Anyway, speaking of the driving, it will tip over if you really push it over a bump, but it's not the easiest thing to do, which is interesting because the normal Pigeon was known for tipping over. Round corners, you kind of get the feeling they're sending too much power to the back, as well as the fact that there's just no weight there. Because think about it, we do have a V8 in the front and four-wheel drive, both added weight over the front axle where we wouldn't normally have weight, and that does disturb the balance a bit. But you can carry more speed out of this and ultimately get a better time than you used to be able to get with the old Pigeon. It's not a bad vehicle to drive overall. You just feel it struggles to handle the power, as I very almost tipped over there. It's got, I believe, about 130 horsepower from this engine. It's a tiny V8, by the way, and yeah, not much more I can say about it really. It's a very crazy vehicle, yet it still managed to set a very reasonable time. It's actually between the 200BX Custom and the 90s Pessima Custom. It's a very interesting place though for it to sit, and slightly below the CRX stock actually, which is I guess pretty worrying. A Pigeon is closing in on a car I really liked to drive. What is the world coming to? Yeah, I mean, getting it to the end, it survived until I hit the bump, and then everything went wrong, and the car was pretty much a write-off, which was a shame. So yeah, you can drive it well, as long as you're careful, and that's all I've got for this episode. I would have liked to do a drag vehicle, but many vehicles have been a bit broken in this update, so it's all I was able to record. Next week, I may not be able to do an episode of this. I'll have to do an automation video or something, but for the time being, goodbye.